Can anybody, there, whoa. Okay, we got it. Maybe we want to go down a little bit. Is that too much? Okay. Thank y'all. I really appreciate everybody being here for our initial meeting of Education and Appropriation. I really thank my committee, and it has some new members on our committee, and just glad y'all are here. And I've got a new vice chairman here, Representative Glanton. I'm excited he's in that position. So, and just excited about our education budget and the funds taxpayers are contributing to the education of our young people in this state. And I'm just excited to be a part of it to make every child's life successful with a great education. With that, I'm going to ask my Vice Chairman, Representative Blanton, to start us off with a prayer.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess we'll get. If it don't, okay. I was getting ready to say, if it don't work and they can't hear me, the person that I'm talking to can hear me. God can hear me, so I'll be okay. But would you pray with us, please? Most heavenly and gracious God, thank you for yet another day. Thank you for allowing us to come together and to assemble that we might do what is in the best interest of children and this great state and the people that reside within it. Father, we ask your blessing over this committee and this committee chair. Father, that we would listen to our constituents, that we would do that which is in the best interest of all involved. We pray this and all things in the mighty and unmatched name of Jesus Christ, and those who believe said.
Thank you, Mike. One person I really want to thank is sitting right here on my right is Sarah, and I could not do this without her, and such a great asset at our Budget and Research Office, and her expertise of keeping an eye on these numbers. And I just thank you, Sarah. Appreciate all you do for this committee. We got a lot of great things in this budget, and we'll go through it here. But first, I want to ask Ted Beck with the Department of Ed to come up and go through some parts of this budget that DOE. Thank you, Ted, for being here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So I believe we are reviewing the governor's amended FY19 recommendations. So I've got a tracking sheet that hopefully mirrors yours. Unless there's any questions to begin with, I was just going to go through and highlight the big change items. I was not planning on covering the repeated statewide adjustment that you'll see in there for the DOAS self-insurance programs that occurs in most of our programs where we've got staff. That's just a premium I pay for our contribution to the state's risk pool. So our first significant change item would be item 24.2.1 in the Audio, Video, Technology, and Film Grants program. This is a recommendation to increase the existing budget from $2.5 million to a total of $6 million, so that'd be a $3.5 million increase. For those of you who haven't heard much about this program, it actually began before it came to us. I think in 2015, the governor at the time recommended an increase, and this was housed inside of the Student Achievement Office in partnership with the One Georgia Authority. Same basic premise. So for the last 5 years, there's been a provider out there that has allowed we, as the administrator of the program now, allow schools to apply to receive AV equipment. This includes the cameras, the ancillary equipment that you need to operate the cameras, editing software, all designed to be used in a school that has an existing audiovisual career pathway program. So there's a academic component of this that has to already exist in order for a school to apply. If we get an application and they actually have a program in place, we essentially place them on a first-come, first-served basis, and the total amount of the package has varied over the years between $25,000 and $30,000 per school. We have been placing somewhere between 70 and 80 of these packages each year that we've had it, so beginning in 2017, last year, and this year into these schools, mostly high schools. The program is available to middle schools as well, but again, there has to be a middle school AV class in existence before we would consider that school as a eligible participant. The feedback that I've gotten secondhand through our CTAE department, which actually administers the grant, it's been positive. These are schools that had, again, some sort of existing curriculum in place, and what they were missing in some cases was just the physical goods to go out there and do some of this work. One of the unique partnerships that we've been able to establish in this last cycle is with the Georgia Film Academy, and so the package that a school receives now is designed to mirror technical specifications that we've gotten from the Film Academy, and so it's supposed to help tie in to where we've got more of a continuous progression, even as early as middle school, into the AV pathway, so that you could potentially start working on something like this in middle school, transition to a high school that also has a similar program, and then into a post-secondary setting with one of our eligible institutions inside of the USG system that are what we call Film Academy schools. And that's been a work in progress, but so far I think the results have been pretty good.
Yes, thank you so much for coming in. I was just curious, did this include the broadcast programs, like just for broadcasting, or is it just film?
No, it would include a broadcast program, so there is a component of that. Some of the software that's included in this package is specific to helping a school have broadcast technology. We've had some schools that use it as the platform by which they broadcast like their high school football games, for instance, or inside of kind of an inter-school channel that it can link up to a network of TVs and monitors inside the school as well, but it does include a broadcast component.
Great.
Ted, this is a pretty big increase. You got waiting lists for this program, got places for these to go if we were to approve?
I know we have a waiting list. I had asked for a copy. I haven't gotten a hold of that yet. I don't know that it would be enough to immediately exhaust all 3.5 million. It would be something where, again, we would encourage the vendor, and our CTAE department obviously would be a partner in this, to go out and get a pool of applicants that would be sufficient to expend it all. So I think we could spend it. We wouldn't be able to spend it the next day after the bill got signed unless we started now really making sure that we had the volume of applications that we needed to parse all that out.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about this particular item? Thank you.
If you look on, I think this is page 34 of your document, or page 2 maybe, this is 24.12.2. This is a recommendation to increase funds for a data storage device in the amount of $286,000. When we did our original budget request under the governor's budget instructions back in September, we had the opportunity to request funds up to 2%, a 2% increase of the existing department budget. So one of our items that we submitted was a nearly $2 million increase to the IT program. The vast majority of that was targeted towards replacing what is becoming quickly obsolescent equipment, mostly servers, routers, and switches. We do most of our servers off campus. We utilize a data warehouse on a contract basis as part of a cloud contract that we have with both Amazon and Microsoft. That's worked very well. We still house a production environment for our developers, so it's a test area so that when we code and develop our various applications, they have a place to put it through its paces before it's actually deployed on the cloud setting. So we do still operate a much smaller IT footprint, physical footprint, than we used to, but we still do have some equipment. So bottom line is, any funding that we would receive with this purpose in mind, we would be able to immediately utilize. And again, it would be just to swap out some of the boxes that we have that are starting to show a little bit of age.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. How old is the current equipment we have, and what is the anticipated shelf life of that which we hope to purchase?
I don't know offhand. I mean, we've got various pieces of equipment. It seems, as somebody on the finance side, that most of these larger investments have a useful life between 5 and 10 years. So we certainly do have some pieces of equipment that are at or beyond that. Doesn't mean they're unsalvageable, but you do run the risk of, particularly with your servers, data loss and those kinds of things. So we're able, again, to utilize some contracts that we have around backup and data protection to keep us operating, but I don't know what the specific piece of equipment would be, since that list kind of changes on a day-to-day basis for them. It's whatever has the biggest priority need. So I would expect it to be a server, and I think we could probably get at least 5 years out of a server pool with this funding.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. That's okay. And the reason I asked that question, you actually just answered the question. With software, we change every day. and with hardware and things of that nature, there's a little bit more shelf life to it. And so that was my concern, was how soon would we come back to be increasing based on the change in technology? And
Sure.
so I think you've pretty much answered that.
We haven't had a increase specific to any of the equipment inside of that budget. And they have an operating budget for some of this stuff now, but this being one-time funds, it would just be kind of a shot in the arm to get some of these things updated. And so it certainly would be helpful. We've gone through a technology update program for the last couple of years now, where a lot of our databases and applications were coded in such a way that they used a framework, as you mentioned, that had kind of gone out of fashion. And so we've been updating those to where they can live and be deployed in the modern architecture that you would expect. And so that comes with a price tag, but so far so good on getting everything up to date. And this would just be a way for us to house some of those applications in that production environment and in the test environment at the same time with a little bit more efficiency.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Item 24.18.1. So this is the start of change item recommendations that are specific to the quality basic education formula. So this is the local 5 mil share component. For folks that are new to this committee that may not have seen this before, this is the state's way of annotating the partnership between local districts and the state and how we fund K-12. And so the idea is that as you as a district have an interest in participating in QBE, you have to theoretically put up 5 of your mills. We don't take the money. Instead, we lower the amount that the formula says we're obligated to fund. And so every time the state's total tax digest goes up as property values increase, this number goes up as well. And so that's what we've been seeing the last, I think, 3 years in a row now, is an increase in the state's total local tax digest. It's back over $1 trillion, which is always fun to say. That's not universal. One of the things I shared in our presentation to the joint committee was that if you go and look, there's actually around 50 or so districts that have lost money since 2013, which was kind of that low point in terms of the property tax digest. It's a lagging indicator, so even though the recession was essentially 2008, 2009 in terms of real calendar dates, the full effect on property values across the state didn't really manifest until that 2013 digest. But all that to say is that for places that are growing, the economic recovery continues to go well for them. Their digests are going up. They're able to fund their systems at a greater rate than they were before, but there are certainly a number of districts, almost a third of our districts, that are in a place where they have less dollars than they did even in 2013. Items 24, oh, I'm sorry.
Hold on, Ted. I've got a question. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was just curious because I am new to this committee, and that is just want to understand. So the local district will put up 5 mills, and then you match that, or you cover that, or you pay them back for that per the formula?
A quick way to think of it is, let's say that the formula says that we're supposed to commit $10 billion to the K-12 system this year. When we look at that statewide tax digest number, if you take 5 mills of that, let's say it's worth $100 million, we would defray that $10 billion outlay by that amount. So we don't ever actually take the money out of a district. We just pay out less on that 5 mil share, if that makes sense.
Still doesn't make sense.
It's a negative number. Yeah, it's weird.
But you pay out less based on what they collected. So if they collect more, then you give them a little bit less.
That's correct. So as the
Okay.
state's digest increase as a whole, the state is obligated legally to pay out less through the QBE formula. So again, it's
Okay.
intended to represent that share. And so the way it shakes out in reality is that for most districts, it's close to a, let's say maybe 55-45 split.
Okay.
55% state funds, 45% local funds, and then anywhere from 5 to 10% depending on the district federal funds. So
Okay.
it shows up in the budget in a kind of odd manner. It's a negative number,
Yeah.
but all it's doing is saying that in that subsequent program, everything in 24.19,
Mhm.
whatever gets appropriated there for QBE, the big program, we're going to pay out that much less that's in the local 5 mil share program. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it?
Yeah, right.
Yes. The question I have is how does the equalization grant fall into play with some of those districts you were saying that end up getting less because of their tax base?
Sure. Both the 5 mil program and equalization are largely driven by the tax digest. Those are the big pieces of the formulas that go into play there. It's the same thing. So if a district is seeing their tax digest go up, if they were eligible for equalization, they have the potential to come off the list if they exceed the statewide average per pupil tax digest. If they stay underneath that threshold, but they've gone up a little bit, the amount that we would equalize them decreases as well. Conversely, if they're one of these districts that have lost funding or haven't seen an increase in their tax digest over the last 4 or 5 years, if they're eligible for equalization, the most likely scenario would be that we're equalizing them at a greater amount because the statewide average has continued to grow each year over the last 4 years. You won't see a change to it in the amended budget. So the appropriation comes out basically once a cycle. So the original appropriation for the FY19 cycle is that 24.17. It's about $615 million. There is a recommendation to increase it in accordance with what the formula produced in the FY20 budget, I think by 70-something million dollars. 24.19, these are all change items that are specific to the QBE program as a whole. Again, this was something we covered in the joint hearings, but the bottom line this year is we didn't see a whole lot of growth in terms of the number of students in the system, and that's been the case for the last couple of years now, and we think the reason behind that is largely just a decrease in births that we saw right there at the start of the recession. We have a graph that you can look at, and beginning in 2008, the number of births year over year went down, and they continued to go down, and we hit kind of the trough, the bottom of that decrease around 2013. The neat thing about that graph is that you can take the number of people or kids born in Georgia in 2013 and know 6 years down the road, that's essentially going to be my kindergarten class coming into the K-12 system. We've been able to go back and look, and over the last 2 or 3 decades, that number of births explains something like 95% of the enrollment that you expect to see 6 years down the road. So we've known that the cohort was going to continue to compress and to decrease in size. The onus is on me to explain why we still need $113 million to pay for the QBE program above what it already cost the state. And the answer there is that the number of students hasn't grown, but the places that and the types of services that these students are receiving has continued to push into more and more expensive categories. QBE consists of, at its most basic level, 18 types of classes that you as a student could receive. There's 4 of them that are just unique to your grade level, right? So you're a kindergarten student or an early elementary grade student, middle school, high school. So just by right of how old you are, you could be placed into one of those classrooms, and they have a certain amount per student paid to them. There are 14 other categories that assume there are additional services being provided to a student. An example is the English as a second language, the gifted program. We have 5 different categories for students with disabilities, CTAE. These are the things that we assume there's going to be more academic services generally related to a human body being there in a greater amount of time than the typical classroom student-teacher ratio that you see for those other basic categories. We did a chart and we looked at in FY 2010, the division was that 66% of our FTEs, which is kind of a shorthand that we use to count students, were placed into one of those basic categories at some time during the day, and the other third were in these high-cost categories. That ratio has changed over the last 10 years to where now 71%, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. So it was 71% 2 years ago. Now it's 66% are placed into one of those. So we've gone from close to 3/4 of students were in a basic category to something closer to like 2/3 of students are in one of those basic categories, and the other third are in those high cost areas. And I don't think, and I made sure to explain this when we first talked about it, I don't think this is anybody gaming a system. I don't think districts are doing anything wrong. I think there's kind of a natural control built into the way that we count students, and I think that really just manifests itself in terms of the family. If you tell me as a parent that my student's going to require some sort of remedial or ancillary academic support, I'm probably going to ask why. And that may not be a universal experience, but I think in most cases, there's going to be some sort of interaction where the family wants to understand what the placement recommendation is about, what kind of services the school thinks that their student needs. And I think it's also just reflecting a national trend where we've worked as a country, and in Georgia in particular, to make sure that we're evaluating our students to really understand what they need, what's going to make them successful in an academic setting. A lot of that goes back to the way that we do IEP planning in particular, and making sure that that's a process that every district understands how to do, and to again incorporate the family and the support structure around that student to say they're going to need the additional services that are required for this particular setting, and that's why we're recommending them to be placed there. One way or the other, the student is going into those classes, so they're receiving those services. There's an audit function that the Office of Student Achievement performs where they go back and test these placements, the FTE data that gets submitted to us, and so there's a control function that exists kind of after the fact as well. So I think it's the right move, and I think it's been good, but it does cost more, and so that's why you see these increases. So when we talk about the midterm adjustment, what we're really saying there is that even though we didn't have a whole new wave of students come into the system this year, those placement types continue to push in that direction, and the total cost of that increase in this particular cycle would be, when you add all these things up, around $130 million. Sure.
Thank you, Chairman Dickey. I asked you about this in the joint session a couple days ago, last week, excuse me. I guess my question is, are we seeing, is it linear in its growth, or is it more bumpy? Are we anticipating, like when we get the big budget, is there going to be an adjustment made here that anticipates the same level?
So you'll see, just by the nature of the way we run the formula as a state, any change that you see in the midterm is generally reflected in the big budget, as it were. So yes, there is a corresponding increase that reflects the same thing. It's because we only have that data point at 2 times a year. And so we're guessing what the makeup of the classroom is going to look like this time next fall. So we don't really know. So that's really what the midterm adjustment's supposed to do in case we guessed wrong. And we typically under-project, and I think that's purposeful. It's a conservative way of budgeting for this. If we under-projected for any district, we catch them up, and so that's what the midterm is. But you'll see the same increase there in the FY20 budget recommendations as well. I haven't looked at a category-by-category basis to really see whether it's linear or not. For the most part, I can say generically it kind of looks like that. It's a general shift. It grows by about the same amount. Those categories widen in the number of placements by about the same amount, it looks like, each year. And it's not on a year-to-year basis staggering, but when you look at it over the course of a decade, we saw some pretty significant shifts, particularly around the students with disabilities. All of those categories have gone up by about 40% over the last 10 years. Which again implies 4% on a year-to-year basis. Gifted was another one that was surprising. We had 60-something thousand gifted FTEs in FY10. This year we had 110,000. So there's just more of that identification and placement happening. So again, each of those categories comes with a greater per FTE payout, and that's why you see that jump.
Follow up, Mr. Chair. This is really interesting information to me. So we're not seeing it plateau out yet. We're not seeing it flattening. It's still on an upward trend.
I don't want to promise you one way or the other without having really dug into it. So I would not be surprised if we saw it continue to move in that direction, but I would assume that there is some sort of natural saturation point where we've identified as many students as you would expect to identify in that.
and I know you probably can't answer this because it's similar to the question I asked you in the joint committee meeting, but I would love to see some study done. I know, I think you responded in the joint committee that it's probably mostly as a result of schools doing a better job of identifying these needs. But I would love to hear some, in a different setting, probably the budget's not a place to talk about that, but some kind of an explanation as to why we're seeing so much more of this, that if it goes beyond the fact that our schools are doing a better job identifying it. And do we see, where's that going? Is it just going to continue to trend that direction for the next decade? Mm-hmm. And if so, we obviously need to make adjustments to be prepared for it. But thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. The last item that we'll cover here is the school security grants. This is item 24.22.1. And so this is a recommendation by the governor to fund $69 million in grants. The way it was calculated is fairly simple. It's just $30,000 per school. The definition of school gets a little bit technical, but by and large, you can assume that it's a physical building with students inside of it, which seems to make sense. That is call them different things in some cases, but we are certainly very much in support of this recommendation. Would be very excited to see this go out. We think we haven't received any indication that there's a specific subset of safety activities or purchases that the governor's office expects. I think it's really going to be driven by local need. Those boards and those superintendents are going to figure out what those systems need and whether that's a physical improvement or a hardening of the campus, or whether it's purchasing some sort of a service where you get an assessment done to help you identify what you think your risk points are going to be. But we would certainly be in support of this initiative and look forward to seeing if the legislature agrees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, would this apply to LEA locally approved public charter schools?
Our understanding is it would, yes.
Continue on, Ted. You've got a couple other things back under 24.19.2. Want to address to that?
Sure. This is the so this is back under the QBE program. So the individual components that I didn't cover: the state charter school, or state commission charter school supplement. The state pays out a per student amount for students that are enrolled in our state authorized charter schools. And I forget the total number that we have in those programs now, but it's grown. The total number of schools fairly rapidly over the last 2 years in particular. In addition to that, there was a piece of legislation passed last year, I think it was House Bill 787, that spoke to some of the specific funding components for this group of students, and it had the net effect of increasing the amount of money that was going to go out to them. So this increase that you'll see in the amended and the FY20 budget is largely related to the two things. It's the growth in the number of schools and the number of students attending those schools, and the payouts that are due to them through House Bill 787. The 24.19.3, this is the charter system grant. Any district that declared themselves either, we had a couple of different categories, but if they selected the charter system designation, there was, I think it ends up being just under $100 per FTE paid out to them. Most of the payments for that have been essentially baked into the ongoing budget since everybody made those designations about 2 years ago now. So any change you see here is just accounting for incremental growth inside those charter systems. Item 24.19.4, every year, at least for the last several years, a mistake happens through the data collection process. And so we have two major initiatives that we require of districts. One is the FTE count, where you're actually going through on a certain day in October and a certain day in March and writing down what each of your students is doing that day. So that's how we know which category to place them into for funding purposes. The other part of that is what we call the Certificated Personnel Index. It's a teacher census. I ask you to write down on a piece of paper who's teaching, what their level of education is, and how many years of experience do they have, and do they participate in either the SHBP program or an equitable health insurance program that your district offers. And so that becomes the basis for the training and experience budget that you see associated with QBE. Invariably, a hiccup will happen, and so what you're seeing here are two instances where I think these are both what's our most common failure point, is where a locally approved charter school is transmitting data to a central office, and a central office is collecting that and then transmitting to us. Sometimes there's not as fluid communication between those entities as you would hope, and in the most cases it has to do with that box that they're filling out that says health insurance. If you don't click that box, and it has to be legitimate, but we fund that at about $11,500 a teacher. So it doesn't take a lot to forget, even with a small charter school, if you have 100 teachers, we're talking about $1 million that got left off the table. So these are both instances where somebody, one way or the other, missed that part of the collection point. And this would be a recommendation to catch them back up and make them whole this fiscal year, which we obviously support. We understand that it's a people-driven process. There's going to be mistakes. We certainly try to correct for as much of it as we can up front at the department level. We do quality control checks to assure that what we're getting looks right. Most of that entails comparing it to last year's numbers. And so the issue with us is, if you're a small charter school inside of a larger district, BIB for example, it's hard for me to see if 20 or 30 people drop off of your health insurance rolls as a big shift year to year, because you have so many more than that at the aggregate district level. So we continue to stress in our outreach and training that we do at districts and their local charters, be careful with this, do it right up front. There's no guarantee that somebody's going to fix this for you. So this is a recommendation to make it right for these districts, but obviously it depends on the will of the budget writers to go through and follow up on it. 24.19.5, this is a recommended increase to the special needs scholarship program. We continue to see incremental growth in this program. The total number hovers kind of right around 4,000 students. For those who are new and haven't seen this before, this is a program that you as a parent and a family or a caregiver can elect to disenroll your student from a traditional K-12 setting. And if you are going to place them into a private setting because of a special need that they have documented through an IEP, the state will take the QBE dollars that were previously associated with your student when they were in a public setting and provide that to your educational institute of choice as a tuition payment. And so again, we've seen it grow. The program, I think, is close to 15 years old now, and it's seen growth year over year, but it's hovering around that 4,000 mark. Same thing as with what we saw in the general population trend. A lot of these placements have been when the student left the K-12 setting, the traditional K-12 setting, they were in a higher need placement to begin with, and so the amounts paid out per student have again followed suit with the rest of the cohort and continue to trend towards more expensive settings. And so this is the funding that we think we would need to catch up and pay out. We pay out on a quarterly basis, so it's usually pretty easy to kind of guess where we're going to end up, because I know my first 2 quarters of payments by this time each year. So we think in order to finalize the spring and the summer payments, we would need about $800,000 to make the program whole.
Thank you, Ted.
Yes, sir.
Is that all you have?
That's all I've got.
Okay. The floor is open for any other questions of Ted, QBE and Department of Ed. Looks like you've answered all our questions. Oh, no, I got one.
Oh,
Excuse me.
so close.
I have a I'm sorry. I have a question going back to the audio video film grants, and I'm just curious as to is the reason for requesting it in the amendment so that you all could go ahead and get the ball rolling instead of waiting till our regular budget that comes out?
I'm not sure I know the exact impetus for placing it in the amended. My suspicion would be just because of the fact that it's being placed in the amended budget, is the idea is that there is an interest in getting a lot of these Film Academy packages out, that there's been enough interest expressed in them that we could do that now, and you wouldn't be making a quote-unquote permanent adjustment to the budget, that back in FY20 it would start again at $2.5 million. So it's a way that if the budget writers are interested you can infuse additional money into the program this year, and it doesn't commit you necessarily to it being part of the ongoing base budget in future years.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next, we are very happy to have Joy Hawkins with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. Thank you, Joy, for coming here and
Thank you for having
talking about your budget and maybe talking about a few things. And you are brand new in this position,
me. Right.
but not new around this education. And thank you for what you do, and looking forward to working with you
Absolutely.
and to get things in your department.
Well, thank you all for your hard work, and we appreciate your attention to education. Obviously, one of the most important pieces for our state work. Governor's Office of Student Achievement, relatively to DOE, it's a very small agency. So I remember when it was created back in 2003 with one individual. We now have a staff of 32, very skilled and talented individuals who work every day to meet our mission, which is to make sure that every student in Georgia has a very good education and is achieving. And so with, as you mentioned, Chairman, this is my 8th day on the payroll, and I'm just kind of finding the water cooler and things like that. But with the help of Jackie Lundberg and Rosalind Teo behind me, I think we can answer most of your questions, and for those that I can't, we'll defer for later. Governor's Office of Student Achievement, our mission is to increase student achievement, school completion, life opportunities for all Georgians. And to that end, the way we do that is by communicating good and easily read communications about data to our school systems and our parents. We provide research and data analysis to inform the governor's policy, budget, and legislative priorities. We audit education programs to ensure fidelity. So some of you may remember some of the school systems that have been audited and actually corrected from those audits. And then identifying, supporting, and sustaining educational innovations that align with the governor's priorities. So we're at a juncture where this governor is coming in, and we're all trying to get our sea legs, but we know pretty much what his priorities are in education. And with the addition of really focusing on rural education and the efforts there, he's very concerned about the teacher pipeline. He met with a group of superintendents yesterday at the Winter Gale, and by and large, that is the #1 issue on their list. You know, back over a decade ago, we knew that we would have a shortage, but then we hit the recession, and that corrected a lot. We're now probably at the worst place in Georgia's history as far as having the right STEM teachers, the right language arts teachers, and special ed. And so there were some suggestions about how to rectify that and really move teachers in recruitment and retention. So we'll be working very closely with a lot of different groups and you to identify ways that we can grow our own in all parts of Georgia. The second issue that that's very near and dear to his heart is the fact that we have 63% of our students who are not reading proficiently at grade 3. And when you think about that, for our workforce particularly, that sends a huge message to employers who are looking to locate here. Because education, low literacy like poverty is a multi-generational cycle. And so we know that those third graders who are not reading proficiently are more likely to drop out of high school, become incarcerated, have poor health, and live in poverty. And as they grow older and have families of their own, more likely than not, their children will not be reading at third grade proficiently. So he's laser focused on that, and the fact that 1 in 6 adults is reading at 5th grade level We will be working with all education state agencies, DFACs, and others to align and focus those efforts because we've got to get momentum, and he calls this an urgent issue. Moving into our 4 areas of work currently, we have 4 main buckets. For the last decade, GOSA has provided innovation grants for local districts. We provide research evaluation, auditing, and data analysis, as I mentioned. We now have, per House Bill 338, which passed last year, and the Chief Turnaround Officer, we have the Governor's School Leadership Academy within the purview of GOSA, and we're now entering into our 2nd year. So we have 26 aspiring principals, 19 principals who have gone through the 1st year of that training. And those are all associated with the lowest 5% performing schools. So as we go into, as we move into the next days of this administration, we'll be working very closely with Governor to continue working on and resetting some of the priorities that have been in position within the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. We will continue most likely with our grant making, but we're taking a close look at that to see which grants have provided the best and the most effective impact, because this governor is all about impact. And so we're looking, reviewing those grants and those opportunities. So with that, the other thing that I'd like to mention is in 2013, we had established by statute a nonprofit organization, which is the Innovation Fund Foundation. And that's where the Qualified Education Donation Tax Credit goes to for the purpose of using that money for the lowest performing schools. As of January 22nd of 19, we produced about almost $5 million in those funds, and the Department of Revenue has approved $4 million for the purpose of providing grants and opportunities for those lowest performing schools. One of the things that we weren't given the opportunity to do by statute is actually go out and fundraise. And so we're talking with the governor about that possibility. I come from the Reach Georgia program, and we started a foundation there where in the first year we raised $750,000 private funds. That goes a long way when you talk about matching it with public funds, so we'll be exploring that possibility. So the only request that we have this year for FY19 is another $350 for the AP exam, and that's just based on a possible underestimate with working with the College Board. Other than that, we have other administrative fees attached with insurance and cyber insurance and so forth, just as DOE has. So at this juncture, are there any questions?
You repeat that again.
Oh, sure. It's on your tracking sheet. It's
Yeah,
on page
it's 27.7 on the last page.
Sorry about that.
It's on our tracking sheet.
And then in the FY20 budget, you're going to see where Governor Deal had transferred the AP exam for STEM and low-income students to go to DOE, from GOSA to DOE. In conversations with with the CFO and Mr. Jones over at DOE, we believe that transfer makes sense because they administer the AP exam anyway, and that would be a small subset. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about the FY20.
Thank you, Representative Glanton.
Thank you. And would that also apply to the PSAT, the SAT, and the ACT? Would that Department of Education or the Government's Office of Student Achievement? Where would that be?
So on the ACT, SAT, that's College Board and that's DOE right now.
Okay. And-
Although we're the host for Georgia Awards, so we have that data.
Okay, and the reason why I asked that question is because I'm looking at research on who's paying for that SAT, who's paying for the PSAT and the ACT, and hopefully whether you're doing the PSAT or the ACT, that it's being paid for, similar to what we do for the AP courses.
You know the answer to that? Do you all know?
We currently pay for the Department of Education has a budget of around $1.4 million to pay for every 10th grader in the state to take either PSAT or its equivalent on the ACT side.
Okay.
It's been with us since I think the inception of the program and still remains inside of the department.
Okay, now the conversation I had last week in this regard was they were not sure if the ACT was being paid for as with the PSAT, but you're telling me today that it is.
There was a piece of legislation, or I think it was enacted in the Appropriations Act a couple of years ago that said either or. So it depends on what the school is doing, but they would just invoices for that. I don't know what the actual breakdown is. I think still the majority of our districts that are participating in it are using the PSAT assessment, but the option to use an alternative to that does exist that the state would compensate for.
And right now, we don't know what that
Breakdown.
ACT equivalent would be to the PSAT. Do we know that by now? What's the?
Well, there was the AccuPlacer, but I'm not sure if that's still what the ACT equivalent is for a 10th grader. So I'd have to follow up with our assessment folks and get you some more
All right, thank you.
information.
Great.
Do you have any more questions of Ms. Hawkins? Well, thank you for being here.
Thank
And
you.
look forward to the
Yes.
good things you're going to do at Gosha. And you certainly did a great job at REACH. And
Oh, thank you.
that's a great program. And I think most of these members of my committee know what REACH does and very involved. And thank you for what you
Thank you. And we
good
look
things
forward to
going.
working with our
Oh,
friends over at DOE as well.
I got one request.
Uh-huh.
Under your Gosha Governor's Honors program is a
Right.
great program.
Yes.
And I found out last year through a couple of my rural counties that they have not sent anybody to, and it's probably reasons, I don't know, probably on a local level. But I just think we got a lot of smaller systems that has been years and years and years since they've had a participant. And I'd like to do some recruiting, y'all, to try to make special efforts to reach out to some of these schools that have not sent a student in many years. I think it just lifts up the school. They come back, and it just sets the bar a little higher for some students. And I wish y'all would really look into that.
That's funny. We talked about that last week. And so we're so far along now, the application process is
Yeah.
passed. But we are in the school systems a lot. And
Yeah.
so what we plan to, there are several things that need to be marketed in a bigger and broader way. And so we've talked about how do we get that information to the school level. I think sometimes when we're up here, we figure that everybody knows about all these programs and tools. And so we're really going to make a strong concerted effort, especially in Governor's Honors, because we know what the alum do and how much pride that develops along in the community.
Well, it's a great program, and thank you for initiating that, wanting to do more of that.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have one other line item budget, the ERS.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that? Are we going to do that? Okay. Oh, we just had one other budget adjustment on your tracking sheets in 25.4 due to we did not pass HB 624 last year, but we set aside the money in anticipation of maybe doing that. We did not, so that $1,082,912 will be taken out. With that, is there anyone else that would like to make any comments or to this committee? With that, that's all our presenters today. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion approved, and thank you, committee, for being here.
Mr. Chairman, I really want to stay for a while.
Well, I'm sure.